They stay chewy and delicious for days, like sliced bread. Bakery-style bagels at last. A lender's first.
Velveeta rustles up a new idea. Get a hot dog and tortilla then. Just throw in some Velveeta. Then roll that pup and heat it on up. Velveeta can't be beat.
Meet Russ Brown, a motorcycle rider's first line of defense.
15 years ago, I founded Bikers Against Manslaughter to lobby for bikers' rights and to provide legal help when you have an accident. Our motto is bikers helping bikers, like Bobby.
Russ showed me and the court that the other driver was wrong. As a biker himself, he knows what to do.
If you have questions about an accident or would like a Bikers Against Manslaughter card, call me, Russ Brown, at 1-800-4BIKERS. Both the card and the device are free.
We have over 300 kinds of produce at Smitty's. And you know something? That's a lot of produce to choose from. We don't have just one kind of apple, potato, or tomato. We have several varieties. And we spend time on our produce. We spray it every 20 minutes to keep it fresh all day long. When people walk into my produce department,
John consulted a professional nutritionist who suggested ways to cut down on fat and cholesterol without sacrificing flavor and variety. He also entered a cardiac rehabilitation program that quickly got him used to the idea of regular, vigorous exercise.
Let's do 2 of these. Stretching up. Good.
I need a lot of psychological assurance that I was okay. And the exercise program and the psychological counseling that came out of that program.
He makes the teacher's job more difficult, particularly at first. It's not like using a textbook in the classroom. It's a whole new way of thinking about students, thinking about the curriculum, thinking about your own role as a teacher. And what we continually saw is that the technology really places tremendous demands on teachers. And in fact, they have to give enormous amounts of time to do what they're doing. Ultimately, it makes what they want to do more possible, but not necessarily easier.
There's another problem beyond the need for teacher training: inertia. Schools tend to do things today the same way they did them yesterday.
Somebody told me one time that if hospitals operated like schools, that they would get a new piece of equipment, you know, to cure cancer, and then they would say, as soon as we have it in the basement, and as soon as somebody learns how to operate it, we'll use it, you know. And that's kind of what we do in schools.
How much would it cost you to make your schools technologically ideal?
In terms of money, if we were to take our high school and to put in the kinds of things that I would like to put in, you know, we're talking $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 in one shot.
And how much do you spend a year on textbooks?
Oh, maybe $20,000, $30,000.
So you're talking a factor of 10 times as much money on technology.
Yeah, and that doesn't replace textbooks.
So there's another problem: cost. Dayton Elementary is one of 5 schools in Indiana taking part in a $6 million technological experiment funded by a consortium of educators, communications companies, and high-tech firms. They've made it possible for every 4th grader to have a computer in school and at home. Remember that most schools spend about $38 per year per student for textbooks. This high-tech experiment is running about $21,000 per child. It's too soon to say whether test scores are being raised, but most families have become more involved.
This is what it'll look like when you push enter and then you put in your ID.
Please press the enter key just once.
Okay.
Only a few affluent suburban school districts can afford this kind of high-tech on their own. Usually when you find a lot of computers in a school, you can bet the school is part of an experiment with big money coming from outside the school system. IBM supports the pilot program at Dayton Elementary in Indiana. Here in New York City at PS 125 in Harlem, the money and support are from the National Science Foundation and Apple, which has booted up this computer lab as part of its Equal Time Classroom program.
Mine is Apple. continents of Africa.
We can get that out of the encyclopedias.
Return. No.
But these are hothouse learning environments made possible by forces from outside the educational system. They're not the norm. Most schools don't have a computer lab like this one. Typical school has one computer for every 30 or 40 students. Schools just haven't been able to overcome the obstacles: lack of money, lack of training, fear of technology, and inertia. But we found one school district where technology has taken root. Alexander is in the northwest corner of North Dakota, about 60 miles from the Canadian border. Even by North Dakota standards, it's a small town. Alexander has 3 churches, 2 saloons, and 1 school. The Alexander School is the only school in the district, which covers 334 square miles. The school has 137 students, kindergarten to 12th grade. There are 7 seniors in this year's graduating class. Fortunately for the economy of Alexander, cattle vastly outnumber the 500 people who live within the borders of the school district. Even more fortunately, oil was discovered some years back. That meant money was not an obstacle to bringing educational technology to Alexander's school. The oil money allowed Alexander to buy 17 computers in 1985. The school still looks and feels like a quiet country school, which it is, but nearly every classroom now has a computer, and the computer lab is in use almost every period. Children are introduced to computers in 2nd grade, and most teachers have integrated computers into their teaching.
Which one told what happened up here?
Look.
The 39 high school English students, for example, must use word processors to compose and revise their term papers. According to Paul Rothenheber, a former computer programmer who runs the computer lab, that's made a big difference in the way Alexander students approach their schoolwork.
I'll give you an example. Last year we had the kids write a 12-page, 15-page term paper, and that was a max. Up to last year, there was nothing beyond 15 pages, let's face it. Most of it was 14 and a half if you can get by with it. Our average term paper that came in was 25 to 35 pages. And the quality was so much better. We're finding that when you can look at a computer and don't have to write, but can enter your thoughts into the computer, that our kids are being more productive that way, and they're using more of gut feelings when they write. You know, it's not just coming from the hand, it's coming from the heart.
Good morning, this is Robbie Ness on WKLO bringing you the news, weather, sports.
Robbie Ness, broadcasting from the hallway to the senior speech class. Once painfully shy and withdrawn, Robbie has become a star. He lives in nearby Rawson, population 12. Few people thought that Robbie, with his poor grades, would ever go anywhere, least of all to college. But Robbie was introduced to computers at school and managed to get one of his own. His grades shot up dramatically. He's programmed a management system for the school library and sold a centennial history program to the state.
Computers are new to me. A matter of fact, I'm taking a class now because about the time I left this last school I had, we had just had just purchased 4 computers. So I really hadn't gotten into it that much myself.
Bill Maxwell came out of retirement just last year to become school principal and superintendent. He inherited all this technology, and he's going to night classes to catch up. He's one of 70 adults who have studied in Paul Rothenheber's computer lab. The new school superintendent gets a lot of help from Robbie Ness. Reed Straube used to be the school superintendent. He's moved on, but he's the one who introduced Alexander to technology and education.
I think what can be learned from what has happened in Alexander over the years is that, number one, size, geographic disparity, the socioeconomic situation in the community should not be limiting factors to what you want to achieve in your school district.
But as these local townspeople recalled, local opposition to change was very nearly a limiting factor.
I think what bugged me more than anything when we were talking about building onto the school and getting a computer room and stuff like that was the people whose kids were educated already, and they say, I spent money educating my kids, that's all enough. I don't care about anybody else's kids.
I got mine.
I got mine, yeah. You find your own.
I think at the beginning, though, there was a lot of hesitation because a lot of people were scared of computers. Mostly the adults, I'd say.
Yeah, and there was a concern that once we started on computers, we'd forget about the basics, you know, like basic math and that, and we'd kind of get over our heads. There was a concern.
Explain more of that.
Well, it's like a hand calculator. You know, if you got a hand calculator, you don't have to be very good in multiplying and dividing. You just punch a few buttons. And that was kind of the concern here, that we'd lose the basics.
I guess one of my main concerns was that they'd use it more as a toy than as a learning tool, you know. And that was a big concern of mine, that it would be just games and stuff on it, you know. And my kids really enjoyed the computers. And, you know, we would like a computer for Christmas, you know. Sorry. You know, but this is how far it's come, you know. They really enjoy it. They do learn on them, you know. So maybe in the long run it was okay.
They're not just playing games?
They're not playing games, no.
An elementary kid can write freehand about 17 words per minute. That's what some schools have calculated. When they teach them keyboarding in the elementary, put a little word processing into it, they're all of a sudden they're writing at 24, 25 words a minute. Productivity going up, and they're seeing big improvements there.
One of these right here. 80 degrees is right on the dot.
Alexander is always short of teachers, so when Superintendent Reed Straube wanted to expand his school's basic curriculum, he again turned to modern technology. Alexander linked up with a company in San Antonio, Texas, that provides classes by satellite to more than 250 small-town schools in 20 states. The new long-distance education system was big news in northwest North Dakota. Kelly Beckler of KUMV-TV Williston filed this report last year.
This satellite dish outside the Alexander School is a window to the rest of the world. Through a nationwide satellite hookup known as tie-in, Alexander is now able to offer classes which would otherwise be unavailable. The satellite links Alexander with a wide variety of foreign language, mathematics, and computer science classes. A cordless phone allows the students to keep in constant communication with the teacher on the other end. Currently, Alexander students and teachers are familiarizing themselves with the brand new system. Credits earned through the tie-in system are accepted just like any other class taken at the Alexander School. This is the first school in western North Dakota to install a satellite learning system. Its $17,000 price tag was paid for with the help of a matching grant from the state. The annual subscription fee for services will be about $8,000, roughly half the cost of hiring one new teacher.
A hopeful beginning, but this winter, only 10 months after Reed Straube had left Alexander, long-distance learning was in trouble.
Well, it's kind of hard to learn from. It's literally boring sometimes, too.
But so is regular class, boring.
Yeah, but you got the teacher up there moving around. I guess that's another thing. You don't see the screen moving back and forth, you know, it's just there. I guess there's no real interaction with it, you know. Like with the computer, you got the keyboard and you more or less control what's going on. With this, you're just stuck with it.
Telephone communication between the TV teacher in Texas and the students in North Dakota was spotty and frustrating, but such technical problems can be overcome. The real problem, according to Straube, is one of attitudes. He was distressed to find tie-in stuck in a closet in a corner of the library.
When I had it here, it was out in front of us in this area. I don't think this is correct back in the corner here. It's isolating it. And tie-in is not to be isolated, you know, it's supposed to be out front and forward with the kids. It's hard to put an opportunity in a little room and make it grow. I didn't find anything of difficulty that couldn't be overcome by either the students or whoever was in charge. And I think that's probably part of it. You've interviewed Paul here for a couple of days. You realize that he's quite gung-ho about computers. I think you need that same person gung-ho about long-distance education.
So it turns out that the essential ingredient, the key to overcoming the obstacles of money, training, fear, and inertia, is leadership. It's people. People like Reed Straube and Paul Rothenheber. Machines won't replace teachers. Quite the contrary. If technology is going to be effective, schools need leadership and vision. And that's what's missing, leadership at the top. Parents are ready. We learned that in Alexander, North Dakota.
In a small community like this, we go that real extra long mile for our kids' education. I really believe that everybody in the community feels that's very important.
Maybe because of the technology, they'll be better farmers, they'll be better merchandisers, they'll be better at communicating with everyone else. Because of this, they will be able to do better here than we have.
My thinking, I guess, any time that you can further the education of your children in your community without jeopardizing your monies, you better go for it, because they have to run the world in the future.
When it comes to technology and textbooks, the presumption is that American public schools have been too slow to change. When it comes to curriculum, the presumption is that American colleges and universities have been too fast to change, and for the wrong reasons. What colleges teach their students has always been in flux. Oxford added Greek to the curriculum in the 15th century. Princeton dropped it in the 19th. A 20th century college curriculum would scarcely be recognizable to a medieval don. Roughly 75% of American colleges are planning some sort of curriculum change, according to the Chronicle of Higher Education. And most of those revisions are because universities are forever grappling with the question of what it means to be an educated person. Their conclusions have been surprisingly different. Stanford University in Palo Alto, California is by most every account an intellectual powerhouse. Its faculty is among the finest. Its graduate programs are top-ranked. Its Hoover Institute provided some of the early brain power for the Reagan Revolution of the 1980s. As the advertisement says, when Stanford talks, people listen. And what Stanford said last year is still reverberating not only among the academics, but also the writers, the critics, and the politicians. After a long and acrimonious debate, the faculty voted 39-4 to replace its mandatory course on Western culture with a new course on both Western and non-Western cultures, with special emphasis on minority and women's studies. Minority and foreign students objected to a reading list consisting entirely of the classics.
We get the message that those are superior works, and works that aren't written by white European males are inferior works.
It's rejecting the notion that Western culture is, from one place on this globe, or that, our society has only been made up from one place, or one group of people. And that's what we're rejecting.
The Stanford decision generated considerable attention on its own. But when President Reagan's Secretary of Education, William Bennett, came to Palo Alto himself to attack the decision, it was polarizing.
Does anyone really doubt that selecting works based on the ethnicity or gender of their authors trivializes the academic enterprise? Does anyone really doubt the political agenda underlying these provisions? The events of the past 2 years at Stanford, therefore, in my mind, strike as an example of what Alan Bloom has called the closing of the American mind.
The Closing of the American Mind led the bestseller list 2 years ago, but its title and its thesis are still rallying points for many academic conservatives who claim that some of the country's best-known universities are caving in to radical demands to restructure the way humanities, especially literature and philosophy, are taught. Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, where the English department is among the most academically radical, is a favorite target of the conservatives. Duke's president, Keith Brody, says the critics do not understand the purpose of a university.
A university is, after all, meant to be a subversive institution, is meant to overthrow entrenched attitudes of inhumanity, arrogance, and intolerance. And we are well served, best served, by those faculty who have never accepted and never believed that providing a liberal education is the static, unmolested, and comfortable activity that those who take potshots at the ivory tower assume it to be.
University is not basically there to fuel a social ideology. It's there to discover the truth and to transmit those truths to students.
Bryn Mawr College would have fit William Bennett's mold. Would have fitted, that is, until the early 1980s. Located in the affluent mainline suburbs of Philadelphia, this elite women's college was known for its traditional curriculum, especially in the humanities. But during this decade, Bryn Mawr has been changing what and how it teaches. Some of the momentum for that change has come from students, such as Beth Posner.
There's a large political movement on this campus, a feminist movement on this campus, and we're very proud of our diverse student body. And it seemed to me that it was time, or it seemed to a lot of people that it was time that the academics started to mirror that there stopped being such a split between what went on in the classroom and what went on in the dorm room.
Bryn Mawr's president for the past decade, Pat McPherson, says changes were necessary because the world outside Bryn Mawr was changing.
Disciplines have changed greatly in the last decade. How we do things, what we do it with, the questions that we ask. I mean, they change, and they're vital and moving, and you wouldn't want them any other way. I mean, education is not a static process.
Should a university be in the business of sending any political message at all?
Well, yes and no. Any curricular statement is political.
How
Any
so?
statement of what we are going to study here and how we are going to do it, you know, is in a sense a political statement. I think the arguments to stay with the curriculums that we would have had, let's say, a decade ago and been comfortable with, it's itself a political statement.
Perhaps the biggest curriculum change has been in Bryn Mawr's required freshman English course, which had concentrated on the classics of English literature, but now carries a strong emphasis on women and third world authors. One of the freshman English instructors is Sabina Sohaini from India.
If you do not teach about non-Western cultures, you are giving the message that non-Western cultures aren't important.
Sohaini is teaching this class an Indian short story called The Breast Giver.
So if women, because they have to mother, you know, childbearing and so on and so forth, cannot join the workforce, then they have to be dependent on men. How is that treated here? To refuse the American students the experience of not knowing anything except American culture or Western culture is to do them a disservice. I mean, it's sort of an academic breach of trust. They need to know more, and everybody does. It's a whole world we are living in. We are not just living in, you know, white Western culture.
I have no objection to studying feminist writers. I have no objection to studying black writers. I have no objection to studying third world writers. In fact, I would recommend that students study them. It's more important for our students to know Western culture than it is for them to know non-Western culture. They should know both, but the prior claim, I think, is for Western culture. And the reason for that is there are several reasons. It's theirs. It's the one they live in. It's the one 99% of them will live in.
But are Western classics still germane to today's increasingly diverse student population? They are, according to John Rodden.
The assumption that Plato, Aristotle, Shakespeare cannot speak to blacks, Mexicans, and so on because these students are of a different race and class, that they are not upper-class white males, I think impoverishes what it means to be human.
John Rodden teaches literature at the University of Virginia and has written a new book on what universities require to be read, the so-called literary canon.
The assumption of the great books tradition, which I find accurate, is that there are some rich works of the human imagination that do open up questions about what it is to be human, and that can be defended largely on aesthetic or literary grounds. That doesn't mean that black, minority, third world, feminist literature shouldn't be taught. It should be, and it can easily be defended on sociological or cultural grounds. The audiences in the university has changed. Part of what literature ought to do is to open up groups to the experience of other groups. But at the same time, if we're talking about what can make a community, what the liberal arts tradition has always argued is that what truly makes us liberal, what is self-enriching, self-actualizing, is works that speak to our humanity, not to us as males or females, blacks or whites, but to something deeper.
Bryn Mawr President Pat McPherson says the traditional courses need updating.
We have an obligation to prepare students, I believe, more broadly than I was being prepared in the 1950s. I had a good education, there was no question about that, but there were whole areas of the world that I was allowed to be extraordinarily ignorant about. And I don't think that does for today's American, who's going to be living in a very much smaller world than I felt I was going out into, a much more interdependent world. And 1 inch is simply not going to do for Americans to be either isolationist or ignorant.
So as Bryn Mawr and Stanford and Duke move away from their classical academic traditions, other universities are embracing them.
I think that a lot of American colleges and universities went through a period of time after the late 60s period during which we lost our capacity to identify a sort of intellectual center.
Bill Nathan is administrator at Temple University in North Philadelphia. Unlike Bryn Mawr, Temple is huge and urban, with a student body largely from the working class. It has been best known for its successful basketball teams and for its even more successful alumnus, Bill Cosby. Until recently, Temple students thought mostly about jobs and careers, and the administration was happy to tailor the courses to suit them.
What we were doing at Temple and what a lot of universities were doing was responding to a variety of marketplace phenomena in which students were seeing a college or university experience as an entryway into a vocational marketplace.
But today at Temple, the atmosphere is changing. Business majors are now required to take the humanities, and every graduate must take a course like this one, 2 semesters long with a reading list that runs heavily to classics, like Shakespeare's King Lear.
Lear has gone mad because of the treatment of his daughters and being out in the storm and all this. So when you read this, it's not necessary to make sense out of it as much as to understand the situation. Okay.
Temple professor Jack Speasy says he likes the challenge of making the classics illuminating to students in the 1980s.
No matter if they're in engineering or medicine or teaching or business or whatever they're in, they have the same problems to deal with that we all do in terms of what's right and wrong in society and how you should treat certain types of situations, what your concept of justice is, who should you vote for in politics, try to figure out what values they have. Those kinds of things, I think everybody needs to understand no matter what occupation they're in.
One of the students in Jack Speasy's intellectual heritage class is Arlington Medley. He's a product of Philadelphia's public high schools and works as a security guard to pay his Temple tuition.
There's my gauntlet. I'll prove it on a giant. Bring up the brown bills. O well-flown bird, I the clout,
But reading from King Lear was not Medley's idea of getting ready for law school. He took the course only because it was required.
I expected intellectual heritage to be a very dry, slow, boring class. It was something force-fed, it was a requirement, and had a very bad name around campus. So I really fit much into that mold where I expected it to be an ugly affair, something I really didn't want to do.
So that means Gloucester lost his eyes
Because
he had this illegitimate son.
Since taking intellectual heritage, I found it to be shockingly interesting. I didn't expect to like the material. As I stated, I didn't expect to like the material, but it showed me things that I wanted to know, although I hadn't had a handle on them. Things that I wanted to know that I didn't know, I wanted to know.
Not all students at Temple are as enthusiastic about the humanities requirements as Arlington Medley. But the administration now believes a university has an obligation to give the students not what they want, but what they ought to have.
The classical education that was delivered to college and university students for many, many decades in this country was, in a sense, the private property of a certain upper class, of a certain elite, of a certain people who had a kind of an entitlement to that quality education. And the history of this institution simply is antithetical to that notion. The students we get should not be deprived of the best that American higher education has to offer simply because they aren't wealthy or they don't wear the right clothing or they don't drive fancy cars.
The argument over the classic versus the modern and the West versus the East is not over. In fact, on many campuses, the argument is intensifying. And each time a university faculty opens debate on what it should teach our young people, it is debating what it means to be an educated person. It is struggling to decide how best to enable our young people to answer Immanuel Kant's famous questions: what can I know? What should I do? For what may I hope? And what does it mean to be human? Next week, our subject is teachers. We'll be showing you what it's like to be a teacher today what's being done to attract and keep good teachers, and what's being done to phase out bad ones. I hope you'll be with us again. I'm Roger Mudd. Good night.
Learning in America is solely funded by the Chrysler Corporation.
Thank you. of